Chapter 39-32. Kong Xiao quietly watched as Yi Mu Bai kissed Wen Yuan. He watched as the girl he had loved for so many years lay in the arms of another man. The strings snapped, and the music stopped. The scene was silent. Only Yi Mu Bai's slight panting and Wen Yuan's embarrassed look could be heard. She looked up at him, forced to look at him. Yi Mu Bai's fingers gently stroked her face, his voice extremely hoarse. "I want to take you away now." His voice was particularly low, imbued with Wen Yuan's familiar desire. And she couldn't resist. He would have to go to socialize eventually. Wen Yuan didn't like to be in the limelight, even though she was the hostess of the scene. She sat alone on the sofa on the balcony, holding a glass of red wine in her hand, looking out into the dark night. The building was very tall, and from here it looked very far out. Neon lights were flashing everywhere, looking very beautiful, just like Kong Xiao's summer night. Wen Yuan looked at it quietly, feeling very lonely. She didn't know when Kong Xiao appeared behind her, holding a glass of red wine in his hand, his figure reflected on the glass opposite. When Yuan didn't turn around, she only asked softly, "Why did you accept this activity?" Kong Xiao walked to her side, but didn't sit down. He lowered his eyes. "Maybe I didn't want to give up." When Yuan's voice was indifferent. "What about now?" Kong Xiao lowered his eyes. His voice was also low. "Wen Yuan, I only want you to be happy, no matter who you are with." She looked up at Kong Xiao, suddenly feeling a little willful, or perhaps it could be said that she was resisting Yi Mu Bai. "Kong Xiao, I want to play the piano." She looked at him. Her eyes seemed to be filled with countless stars. Kong Xiao smiled slightly. He said yes, because he could see that she was unhappy. 5 minutes later, when Yuan sat in front of the piano in front of the French window, Kong Xiao set up the violin beside her. He looked down at her, his gaze confirming the other party's intentions. She played Ode to Joy. She hadn't finished it for a long time. She couldn't even remember the tune clearly, but when Yuan played it casually, even if she played it wrong, she didn't care, because she was very happy. Concho accompanied her at the side, playing the violin to harmonize with her. When she made a mistake, he would make a mistake as well, one in front and one behind. It was like a chase strangely in harmony. In the hall, the guests, who were originally in 2s and 3s, were slowly attracted to the stage. It was the most splendid ensemble they had ever seen. It would not be an exaggeration to describe it as incisively and vividly. Madame Yi on the stage was as dazzling as a fairy. Yi Mu Bai held onto her wine glass and stared at Wen Yuan, who was on the stage. She looked very happy. She had never been so relaxed before. He finally saw the stars in her eyes, and this was the happiness brought to her by another man. At this moment, she probably didn't know how beautiful she was. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sky was filled with stars. Her clothes fluttered in the wind, as though she could fly away at any moment, as though he couldn't catch her. He had been with her for so long. Maybe he had fallen in love with her, but at this moment, Yi Mu Bai felt his heart move for the first time. Her side profile was very beautiful. It was a very standard oval face, very gentle. The way she played the piano was elegant and lively, and her eyes were full of little stars. Yi Mu Bai felt that at this moment, he was a little drunk, and all this was because of his wife. He looked at her quietly until she finished the last note. He stepped forward and stood beside her, leaning over and kissing her. At the end of this chapter. Chapter 39-33. A light kiss landed on her forehead. His voice was very hoarse. "You play really well." When Yuan's fingers were still on the piano keys. She was surrounded by Yi Mu Bai's aura. She was a little dazed because he actually wasn't angry. Yi Mu Bai actually wasn't angry? When Yuan's voice was very soft. "Really?" He bent down and actually sat next to her. He tilted his head and looked at her. "I'll play a song with you, MM." When Yuan was surprised. "You know how to play too?" He laughed. Actually, with a family like theirs, there was nothing they couldn't do. They would always dabble in music when they were young. It was just that they didn't play it much later on. While they were talking, Kong Xiao quietly left. Yi Mu Bai continued to speak. "Xia Yi, this song is not bad." As he spoke, he had already started the prelude. When Yuan had no choice but to play with him. She saw Kong Xiao leave from the corner of her eye. She didn't say anything. Maybe this was good for him. Yi Bai played surprisingly well. His fingers were slender and beautiful. They were very pleasing to the eye. When Yuan looked at his fingers and suddenly remembered something. Her face heated up and she played a few wrong notes. Yi Bai tilted his head and looked at her. He smiled lightly. Wen Yuan, what are you thinking about? Nothing. She answered very quickly, which made people suspicious. Yi Bai smiled and didn't say anything else. He just continued to play. He really played very well. He was so good that when Yuan felt that he was guiding her. He was so good that she felt embarrassed to go out and play the piano for a living since he played so well as an amateur. He was simply all-rounder. After the song was finished, he tilted his head to look at her. Did she still want it? He asked with a smile. Wen Yuan couldn't refuse. That night, CEO Yi put aside all his business and focused on accompanying his Madame Yi. They played the piano for the whole night, and then the scene of Wen Yuan and Kong Xiao playing the piano together and Yi Bai playing the piano together quickly became a hot topic on the Elven National Goddess of Night. Those two videos simply blew up Wen Yuan's beauty. The most discussed topic below was whether the goddess was more compatible with Kong Xiao or the former movie king. But the goddess's identity soon came out. It was the movie king's wife, Wen Yuan. Yi Bai was in the car when he got to the trending topic. In less than half an hour, his former fans and Konkyo's fans had pushed him to the top of the trending topic. He leaned against the back seat of the car and gently scrolled through the comments. Some of the comments said that Wen Yuan and Kong Xiao were a couple, while others said that Wen Yuan and Kong Xiao were a couple. However, when he saw someone conclude that Wen Yuan was Yi Bai's wife, he smiled slightly. Wen Yuan drank a little too much. She sat on the other side of the car. She took off her high heels and curled up there. Her feet were exposed outside her skirt. They were fair and delicate. Yi Bai watched quietly. Then he saved a video of him and Wen Yuan and a few photos that he liked. Then he called his secretary, Hina. Remove all the trending topics related to Wen Yuan, no matter what it takes. Hina was actually also looking at the trending topic. She was amazed by the beauty of CEO Ye's wife. After receiving the call, she felt that it was a pity. However, she still obediently removed the trending topic. After all, Wen Yuan was an artist. Her identity didn't need to be trending. CEO Yi didn't want his wife to be seen by many people. Sigh. She was really beautiful. Yi Bai hung up the phone and looked at Wen Yuan. She was looking at him. Her voice was hoarse. What's wrong? End of chapter. Chapter 39-34. He didn't say anything, but just grabbed her in his arms and kissed her passionately for a while. Then he said to the chauffeur in front, drive the car to the Four Seasons Hotel in front. The old chauffeur in front didn't know how to drive at all. CEO, Yi couldn't wait to drive now. Wen Yuan was also stunned. She was a little drunk, but not too drunk. She knew very well why he was bringing her to a hotel, and he even chose the Four Seasons Hotel. She instinctively said no, but Yi Bai wasn't someone who would easily change his mind, especially when it came to matters regarding men. He pressed a button, separating the back seat from the front. He held her in his arms and reached out to pull out her hair. Her long hair was let loose and fell on her face, looking very beautiful. The back seat was filled with the smell of alcohol, which was very alluring. Yi Bai gently licked and kissed her chin, his hands threaded into her hair. As he kissed, he murmured, when I was playing the piano just now, what were you thinking about when you looked at my hand? Wen Yuan bit her lip. I wasn't thinking. You're lying. His thin lips moved to the side of her lips, which were burning hot. Wen Yuan, you were obviously thinking about how long my fingers are when I do this to you. With that, he succeeded. Wen Yuan cried out, Yi Bai no. He hugged her and kissed the corner of her mouth. Don't you like it? He began to torture her, grinding so gently that Wen Yuan's heart trembled. But she didn't dare to make a sound, because she was afraid that the chauffeur in front would hear her. Yi Bai chuckled lowly, lifting her beautiful chin with one hand and kissing her. Don't you like it, Wen Yuan really couldn't stand it. She begged him to move his hand away, but it was useless. Instead, he treated her even worse. She really couldn't stand it anymore, so she could only hug his neck and bite hard on his shoulder. Yi Bai was a little in pain, but he didn't care about the pain. His eyes were fixated on Wen Yuan, watching her soften in his arms. It was very tempting. He leaned close to her ear and murmured hoarsely, "Is it comfortable?" She couldn't say a single word. She lay limply in his arms, her face pressed against the side of his neck. At this moment, the scent of passion mixed with alcohol was the most seductive. Not only Yimu Bai, but Wen Yuan also sank into it, as though he was possessed by a demon. When she woke up, he carried her into the presidential suite and kicked the door open. He carried her to the master bedroom and dumped her on the soft, ridiculously large bed. Wen Yuan's black hair was scattered on the snow-white pillow, giving off a gorgeous vibe. The ash-gray gown she was wearing was glamorous and sexy. Yimu Bai bent over and kissed her, cupping her face and kissing her. He praised her skin and how beautiful everything about her was. He had never spoken words of love like this before. But now he wanted to tell her, because he really liked her. His heart was moved. He really wanted her. He really wanted to take her for himself. He kissed her for a long time, then looked up at her intoxicated little face and chuckled. "You like it too, don't you?" Wen Yuan's expression was a little dazed. She stared into his eyes, reaching out and hugging his neck gently. Yimu Bai kissed her for a while more, reaching out to touch her red lips. He let her hold his fingers, and he teased her gently. Wen Yuan resisted and turned her face to the side, but he didn't let her go. He chased after her and forced her to cry. He laughed softly. "How's the taste?" End of chapter. Chapter 39-35. Wen Yuan's face was extremely red, but she couldn't do anything about it. He kept teasing her, letting her taste it. In the end, she couldn't take it anymore and bit his finger lightly. Yimu Bai's eyes darkened. He retracted his hand and held her face with both hands, kissing her. He had never been so patient before. It was as if he had a lifetime to do this. Wen Yuan trembled and buried her face into the pillow. He chased after her and kissed the soft flesh behind her ear. He kissed her again and again until her whole body went limp. At the peak of their passion, Wen Yuan looked up and tugged at his black hair, begging him to stop. "Be good." He comforted her, but it was torturous. For the entire night, he had been very gentle to her. But for Wen Yuan, she even wished that he would be rougher this night, because he was too torturous. Due to the excessive indulgence, she still slept through the next morning. When Wen Yuan woke up, it was already 10 o'clock. Yimu Bai was still there. When she opened her eyes, she saw his handsome face. Then, she was kissed by him and even made out twice. When it was over, Wen Yuan lay in his arms. She had no energy left in her body, but he still seemed to be restless. She said weakly, "I don't have any energy left even if you want to." She didn't want to get up. It was probably because the feeling last night was good, so she didn't reject him today. After they were done, she still lay on his body, feeling lazy and comfortable. Yimu Bai's hand was on her back. He paused for a moment. "I'll carry you to soak for a while." She didn't want to, and he didn't want to either. But he knew that he was a little rough just now. He was afraid that he would hurt her, so he wanted to carry her to soak for a while. After he said that, Wen Yuan grunted, "Carry me." Yimu Bai smiled. He got up and carried her to the bathroom. 5 minutes later, Wen Yuan was comfortably soaking in the hot water. She was still lying in his arms. She was half asleep as he massaged her sore muscles. "Yimu Bai, where did you get those six-pack abs? You don't even work out." She laid on her stomach and looked at him like a little girl. Her hands were still in a mess. He laughed softly and let her do as she pleased. Then, when she cried out in surprise and tried to pull her hand away, he held it. His voice was hoarse. "The seventh piece," Wen Yuan bit his lip. "Let go of my hand. You were the one who touched me first, Wen Yuan. How can you do that?" He whispered into her ear. His voice was hoarse. "Settle it." Wen Yuan's face was as red as a tomato. She refused to budge and continued to lie in his arms. "Wen Yuan, you were the one who provoked me first." He bit down hard on her neck, causing her to cry out in pain. After that, he did it carelessly and hastily. Wen Yuan didn't want to soak anymore, so he carried her to the shower. In the end, he still pushed her against the bathroom wall. Wen Yuan was really exhausted and slept all the way until 1 in the afternoon. When she woke up, Yi Mubai was still there. He was wearing a white bathrobe and sitting on the sofa reading documents. There was a stack of documents on the other side. Secretary, he must have been there. Wen Yuan sat up and scratched her hair. She wanted to say something, but stopped herself. Yi Mubai looked up and saw her. He smiled faintly and said lazily, "Don't worry. I won't let anyone see you like this, be it a man or a woman." As he said that, he put the documents aside and walked towards her. He leaned over and kissed her. "I'll get someone to send you something to eat. Are you hungry?" End of chapter. Chapter 39-36. She said a little embarrassedly, "You haven't eaten yet?" Yi Mubai didn't answer her at first. His fingers touched her face gently, and after a while, he said hoarsely, "I'm very full, very satisfied." Wen Yuan Yi Mubai got up and dialed the internal line. As he looked at Wen Yuan, he mouthed for her to get dressed. Then, he smiled when he saw her blushing face. After ordering a meal with the customer service, he hung up. "It'll be here in 20 minutes. Wash up first." Wen Yuan put on a bathrobe and went to the bathroom. Looking at herself in the mirror, she couldn't recognize herself. Her face was red, her hair was messy, and her eyes were misty. To put it nicely, she was lazy and sexy. To put it bluntly, she was overindulgent. She stared blankly for a long time before she tied up her hair, brushed her teeth, and washed her face. After tidying herself up, she walked out. Just then, the male waiter who delivered the food came over. Yi Mubai said in a low voice, "Go inside." Wen Yuan looked at her bare feet and her overly low neckline. She let out an "ah" and went back to the master bedroom, only coming out after a while. He still seemed a little unhappy. Sitting at the dining table, he scrutinized her as if he wanted to burn 2 holes in her. Wen Yuan tugged at her clothes and said softly, "It's not my own clothes." He was still glaring at her, but after a while, he calmed down and said mildly, "Sit down and eat." Wen Yuan sat down. He looked at her clean face, which was indescribably comfortable. His heart skipped a beat, and he said softly, "Come here." Wen Yuan looked up. "I want to eat." He was still looking at her. "Come here." Wen Yuan still went over. As soon as she went over, he pulled her onto his lap and said, "Sit here and eat." His sudden kiss made Wen Yuan a little uncomfortable. Moreover, it was a little unbearable between 2 thin layers of clothing. She bit her lip and said very softly, "I want to come down." He had already started to feed her. Wen Yuan refused to be fed. "I'm not a little girl." Yi Mubai looked at her. "You want me to feed a little girl?" He smiled. "It can only be Yihui." Wen Yuan looked down. "I'll eat myself." He fed her persistently. "Eat or be eaten. You choose." She stared at him. She really couldn't stand him anymore. "Yi Mubai, can you not be so shameless?" He just stared at her and laughed. "What do you think?" Wen Yuan gave in and was fed by him mouthful by mouthful. After eating, she said in a low voice, "Yi Mubai, just once." He looked at her, his voice low and chuckling. "I only have one chance." As he spoke, he was about to tell her that he had done it many times and could do it many more times in the future. Wen Yuan's gaze was indescribable. Yi Mubai's voice was hoarse. "I've taken the medicine." Her gaze was even more indescribable. He smiled and nibbled the tip of her nose. "You took it for real? You're so stupid." Wen Yuan covered his nose and glared at him. He smiled and kissed her again. "All right, go take a rest. I'll go to the office after I'm done eating. Get the chauffeur to pick me up." Wen Yuan bit her lip and didn't leave immediately. Instead, she placed her hand on the back of his chair. Yi Mubai enjoyed the feeling of being kissed. He chuckled. "What's the matter?" Wen Yuan hugged his shoulders from behind. "Get the chauffeur to pick me up." Yi Mubai's body stiffened. After a long time, he turned to look at her. "Wen Yuan, you're acting coquettishly." End of chapter. Chapter 39-37. She didn't say anything. She just hugged his shoulder and gently rested her face on his shoulder. After a long time, she whispered, "I don't have any clothes to wear. My gown was torn by you last night." He was so gentle last night. She didn't understand why the gown was torn. Yi Mubai didn't ask anymore. He just quietly finished his meal and turned around to lead her to the master bedroom. He threw her on the soft bed again. He didn't do anything but kiss her. He kissed her everywhere. Then he pressed against her ear. Wen Yuan, I don't need to take medicine when you are like this, she trembled. He slowly moved over and nibbled on the tip of her nose. I'll take you to the company. Let's come back tonight. There was a child at home. He couldn't be too indulgent. Wen Yuan buried her face in the pillow and said in a very low voice, Yi Hui in Xiangnan. Yi Hui was sent to my mother's place. Xiangnan is grown up. There's chauffeurs and aunties to take care of him. What are you worried about? Men and women were different. Although the love jade was like poison, Wen Yuan wouldn't be like him. She was still worried about the child at home. She wrapped her slender arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. She said in a low voice, Let's go back. I want to take Yi Hui home. Yi Mubai was stunned. He realized what she meant, and his heart softened. He lowered his head and kissed the corner of her mouth. Let's go back. I want to take Yi Hui home. Wen Yuan still wanted to say something, but he had already gotten up. He took 2 sets of clothes from the changing room. They were sent by Secretary He. He gave them to Wen Yuan. Put them on. There is an important meeting in the afternoon. Otherwise, he would have chosen to spend the whole day here. Wen Yuan changed into the clothes he had prepared for her. It was a beige floral dress. It was very elegant. She tied her hair into a bun. She looked fresh and clean. She didn't put on any makeup and went out with him. Unexpectedly, the entrance of the hotel was surrounded by reporters. There were 30 to 40 of them asking questions. CEO Yi, I heard that you and Mrs. Yi left the banquet early. Are you going to have some alone time? CEO Yi, Mrs. Yi was immediately removed from the hot search list. It was your doing, right? CEO Yi, you seem to love Mrs. Yi very much. Are you willing to give us an exclusive interview? Yi Mubai's face was cold the whole time. He carried Wen Yuan in his arms and walked directly to the parking lot. His Mulsanne was parked there, and he opened the door to let Wen Yuan get in. He turned around, got in the car, and fastened his seatbelt. He didn't even care about the group of reporters. Wen Yuan, on the other hand, turned his head to look at him and asked softly, I'm trending. Yi Mubai buckled his seatbelt and looked at her. I'll give you a gift later. She gasped and looked at him. Yi Mubai smiled faintly. You like it? Wen Yuan looked at him with a curious expression. He started the car and drove towards the Starlight building. It wasn't far, and it only took him about 20 minutes to get there. He unbuckled his seatbelt and led her out of the car and into the building. From the moment he walked into the building, he was very busy. In the lobby, he met a few middle and high-ranking officials and gave them a few instructions. When he arrived at the office on the top floor, he only sat for a while before going to the meeting. Wen Yuan stayed in his lounge to catch up on sleep. When she woke up, he was back. However, he was in the office having a team meeting with 2 executive vice presidents. Wen Yuan lay on the bed in the lounge and thought to herself, where did he get the energy from? He clearly did it so many times in one day and one night. Or did he really take his medicine? In a chapter. Chapter 39-38. As she thought about it, her face heated up, and she didn't dare to think further. About half an hour later, he finally had time to relax. He walked into the lounge and saw that Wen Yuan was awake. He bent down and bit her face. How long have you been awake? Half an hour. She turned her body sideways, her expression relaxed and soft. He really wanted to have her once here, but thinking that she might not be able to take it, he gave up and changed it to a light kiss. After a long time, he let go of her and said in a low voice, I'll show you something. Wen Yuan bit her lower lip. What? He pulled her up, helped her tidy her hair, and pulled her out. In his office, Wen Yuan saw a huge photo and a few smaller photo frames. It was her playing the piano last night and playing the piano with him. And on his desk, there was a single photo of her sitting alone on the sofa and looking out at the night sky. The side profile was very beautiful. Do you like it? He smiled. The photo of us playing the piano together can be hung in the bedroom as a wedding photo. I want to put this big one in the living room. It matches the decoration. As for the other photos, some could be placed in his study, and some could be placed in her private changing room. Wen Yuan looked at them and then looked at him. These are the photos that are trending? He smiled. Yes, but I don't want to share you with others. So I removed it. Wen Yuan didn't like to be in the limelight, but she liked these photos very much. She agreed and asked him when she could hang it at home. Now, Yi Mubai smiled and walked over to call the internal line to ask secretary he to get someone to do it. In a while, a few people came in to send the things to the villa. When they returned, it had been hung up according to his request. Their bedroom finally looked like a married couple's place. When Yuan looked at the photo frame on the bedside table, she liked it very much. She looked at it for a long time. Yi Mubai hugged her from behind. "Do you like it?" "Yes." She turned her head and smiled. "Why did you do this all of a sudden?" He whispered into her ear. "Because you look like a little wife now. Last night's reward." When Yuan was furious, he turned around and glared at him. "Yi Mubai, you're too despicable. Damn it, you were so happy last night, and you kept biting me, huh?" He hugged her waist, kissed her, and whispered against her face. She had never been able to handle him like this. When Yuan bit his lips, Yi Mubai chuckled. "Scared?" With that said, he turned her around and nibbled on the tip of her nose. "I'll let you go tonight." She was speechless for a moment. "Is it fun for Yi Mubai to play tricks on me?" He pressed his forehead against hers. "Mrs. Yi, you want me not to let you go?" "No." She snorted softly and then whispered. Yi Mubai, his voice was as gentle as the night. "I know. I'll take it slow." He knew what she was worried about. What they were touching now was not only flesh and blood, but also souls. When Yuan was a little afraid, he comforted her, saying that it didn't matter, that he could wait. He kissed her, carried her to the desk in the study, and gave it to her gently, just to please her, not for his own sake. He said that he could wait for her to love him slowly. At this moment, she really felt the gentleness that belonged to Yi Mubai. She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband addicted to pampering, talking about life, and looking for a bosom friend, recommending the urban guru Shi Xinshu. Chapter 39:39. That night, he didn't do anything to her. After settling Xiangnan down, he took her to the study and gave her a book to read while he dealt with his work. He said that he had been putting in a lot of effort for her recently, and that he had neglected his work. With that, he planted a kiss on her forehead. When Yuan looked at him, "You can do it twice less." His eyes were full of smiles as he looked at her and chuckled. "When Yuan, you're obviously not saying what you mean. Am I making you uncomfortable?" She looked up helplessly. He smiled and pinched her cheek. "All right, stop fooling around. I'll accompany you after I'm done." "I don't need you to accompany me." When Yuan licked his lips and said bitterly. He looked at her and suddenly leaned over. She thought that he was going to do something to her, so she closed her eyes and let out a small scream. However, what she expected didn't happen. He only nibbled on the tip of her nose and chuckled. "When Yuan, you're so cute." When Yuan. She blushed a little. He stepped back, and the expensive fabric of his clothes made a slight sound. She then opened her eyes and looked at him. His eyes were still smiling as he stared at her. After a long time, he reached out and pinched her cheek. Silly. When Yuan could only pretend to read because it was too embarrassing. Yi Mubai walked over and wanted to light a cigarette. However, he gave up when he saw Wen Yuan and said to her instead, "Wen Yuan, help me make a cup of coffee." Wen Yuan put down the book and stared at him for a while before getting up to make the coffee for him. Yi Mubai was a man who liked to enjoy himself. In this aspect, he was somewhat similar to Qin Shan, just not as exaggerated. He had a very good coffee machine. Wen Yuan hadn't used it much and only made a cup of coffee for him after half an hour. She took a sip and felt that it was too bitter, so she added cream and sugar. When she brought it to him, he took a sniff. Then he looked at Wen Yuan in surprise. Unexpectedly, it tasted terrible. She actually added cream to his drink and sugar. However, he still drank half a cup. Wen Yuan coughed lightly. "It tastes good, doesn't it?" He looked at her, then reached out and pulled her into his arms. Her body fell onto his lap, and he kissed her. Their lips intertwined, and she tasted the coffee she had brewed. After a long time, he let go of her and said in a low and husky voice, "How does it taste?" Wen Yuan bit her lip, and then she couldn't help but lick her lower lip like a kitten licking paste. He kissed her again, and she couldn't help herself. Wen Yuan sat on his lap, her hands clutching his shirt, and she was as helpless as a young girl. After a long kiss, her face was intoxicated, and her eyes were misty. Yi Mubai chuckled. When you on, you really give me a sense of accomplishment. With that said, he placed her in his arms. With one arm hugging her, he flipped through the documents with the other. From time to time, he would stroke her as if he was petting kitten. When Yuan moved uncomfortably, he would say in a low voice, "If you move again, shall we go back to the room? Why don't we do it here?" When Yuan didn't dare to move. After some time, her legs were sore, and she couldn't help but say, "Yimu Bai, aren't you tired?" "I'm tired." He smiled. "I've exhausted myself when Yuan." She couldn't help but say, "That's not what I'm talking about." "But that's what I wanted to say." He chuckled, then closed the documents. "I'm not reading anymore." She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Hubby, addicted to pampering. Talking about life, looking for a confidant. Chapter 3940. He carried her back to the bedroom. When Yuan's voice was a little stammering, "Why? I'm not as pretty as you." He whispered against her lips while holding her. After a few steps, he went back to the bedroom. He put her on the bed, leaned over, and kissed her. His fingers went through her hair and kissed her gently. When Yuan was moved, but she resisted. She was afraid that he would do it again. She put her hands on his shoulders and said in a low voice, "Aren't you exhausted?" He buried his face in her neck and chuckled. "I didn't say I would do it." When Yuan turned her face away, "Why do you always hug and kiss me if you don't want to do it?" He held her face and chased after her to kiss her. "Do you miss me when Yuan?" "No." She turned her face away embarrassedly. Her face was very hot. Yimu Bai chuckled. "Let me check." He moved his hands up and down while saying that. He sighed. What if Mrs. Yi needs it and Mr. Yi is exhausted again? She was so amused by him that she didn't know what to do. She reached out to hug him and held his hand with her other hand to stop him from doing evil again. Yimu Bai just let her hold his hand tightly. After a long time, he got close to her ear and said in a low voice, "Mrs. Yi, it's bad. Mr. Yi wants it now." When Yuan hugged him tightly and said in a trembling voice, Yimu Bai, she felt very ashamed, but she still got close to his ear and whispered, "I'm still in pain." He turned her face and said in a hoarse voice, "Let me see." She didn't want to, but he still pressed her head down. When he looked up again, his eyes were a little deep. Then he kissed her again for a long time. Then he went to get the medicine for the wound and carefully applied it on Wen Yuan. She kept lying with her face buried in the pillow, and her fingers clutched the bed sheet. Yimu Bai smiled. "Wen Yuan, you look like it's your first time." She looked at him with misty eyes, and so did he. Then he leaned over and kissed her again. He didn't know how many times and how long he had kissed her that night. It was like a night. Then he gently whispered in her ear, "Wen Yuan, I think I've really fallen in love with you." She was bewildered, and he placed her hand over his heart. His heart was beating very fast. Perhaps it was because they were moved, but their relationship improved. Although when Yuan stayed at home like before, Yimu Bai would find time to accompany her to watch concerts and go shopping. Wen Yuan did not lack anything, so she would bring him to some antique shops to look at some ornaments. Occasionally, she would buy some. She had a good eye, so she would always be able to buy some very artistic things. Yimu Bai liked to accompany her, even more than he paid attention to Xiangnan and Yihui. In the beginning, he came home very early. He would pick up Xiangnan and guide Xiangnan in his homework. Then, he would bathe Yihui and play games. He became a good husband and father. However, when Yuan needed to repay his efforts at night, he often trapped her under his body and teased her until she blushed and her heart raced. He was only willing to give it to her when she begged him. In the end, he would even say that she had overused him. It was obvious that he liked women, but he still forced her to admit that it was what she wanted. He was too despicable. However, such feelings that were soaked in love and desire were like a dose of poison. When Yuan couldn't refuse it, she started to be different from before. The clothes in her wardrobe started to be bright and lively, unlike before, which was always in line with the norm. She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. talking about life and looking for a bosom friend. Chapter 39:41. She even began to like wearing jeans and sweaters or black casual pants and shirts because he always took her out when Yuan wanted to cut her hair shorter, but he didn't allow it. When Yuan felt strange, it's more convenient to cut it shorter. At that time, Yimu Bai was reading documents and seemed to be absent-minded. She asked again, and he put down the documents and looked at her. Because when you lie on the bed without clothes, your long hair is very tempting. When Yuan said, Yimu Bai, pretend that I didn't ask this question. When she ran away, he laughed and then pulled her back to kiss her. After kissing her for a long time, he picked her up and put her on the bed. He peeled her as clean as an egg, lifted her hair, and said in a low voice, just like this. When Yuan said, Yimu Bai, you're overindulging me. That's also Mrs. Ye's fault. He whispered sexily, When Yuan, you don't know how beautiful your body is. Sometimes she would also take Yi Hui to his company. She and Yi Hui would sit on the sofa. Yi Hui would play with toys while she would read a book. Yimu Bai had a lot of meetings, so he would play with Yi Hui in the office for a while. Yi Hui fell asleep. When Yuan covered her with a quilt and said in a low voice, I'd better not bring Yi Hui here in the future. After saying that, she looked up and was kissed by him. After a long time, Yimu Bai sucked her lips and said in a low voice, I want to see you. He looked at Yi Hui, then carried Wen Yuan out and put her on the sofa in the office. He kissed her. Wait a minute. She watched him get up and walk to the desk. She pressed the internal line. Secretary He, I won't receive anyone today. Secretary He was stunned for a moment and then understood. CEO Yi had something to do? She shook her head and smiled gently. CEO Yi had entered the honeymoon period. In the office, Yimu Bai walked back slowly and sat next to Wen Yuan. His fingers gently stroked her face. Here, or on the desk. Wen Yuan buried her face in his lower abdomen and hugged his waist. No, I miss Wen Yuan. He lowered his head and kissed her. He also knew that he had been a little too indulgent recently. For more than a month, other than her period, he had dominated her several times, almost every night. Sometimes, when it was raging, he didn't know where he got the energy from. It was as if he didn't know fatigue or tiredness and just wanted to possess her. At this moment, looking at the faint blue color under her eyes, his heart softened. He gently put down the palm that was originally caressing her and faintly smiled. I'll let you go. When Yuan made a no sound and obediently rested his face on the side of his legs, his arms still hugging him. He laughed again. Acting spoiled again? When Yuan, you're already in your 30s. Not as young as the girls in your company, right? She said softly, her fingers gently tracing his heart. In fact, compared to a love, she preferred this kind of embrace. After when Yuan said that, he laughed. I don't even know what they look like. How do you work? She bit her lip. Yimu Bai, if one day you really have an affair with an artist in the company, he sat up a little straighter. Then what? When Yuan thought for a long time before he came up with a word. I'll just ignore you. He stared at her for a long time and couldn't help laughing. When Yuan, I thought you could say something powerful, such as asking me to freeze her and never cooperate with her again. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for a confidant. Chapter 39:42. I won't. I'll get a divorce, she added faintly and looked at him. Yimu Bai was stunned. He held her face and said word by word, I won't give you this chance. It better be like this. She propped herself up. Otherwise, I'll cut you up myself. He stared at her and smiled. Then, he grabbed her hand and pulled it over. You're going to cut me up? Is it here? When Yuan was very embarrassed when he pulled her over. She simply lay in his arms. Yimu Bai, don't be so shameless, he chuckled. Am I shameless or are you shameless? You want to cut me up? When Yuan, have you eaten a bear's heart or a leopard's gall? With that, he pressed her little hand and put his thin lips next to her ear. Help me get it out. When Yuan bit her lip. Yimu Bai, you're simply lustful and crazy at the same time. He chuckled. Then, do you like lustful and crazy? When Yuan sat in his arms. Her face was a little red and her eyes were watery. He stopped joking around. His deep eyes locked onto her and his voice was very low. When you on? Her long hair was scattered on her shoulders. She looked like she had been abused. She knelt in his arms and was a little helpless. She wanted to break free, but he wouldn't let her. When you on bit her lip. I don't know. He leaned over and whispered into her soft ear. You like me? When you on. You like how I treat you. You also like how I do things to you. You hug me every time. How dare you say you don't like me? She buried her face in his shoulder. She didn't allow him to say anything else. He laughed like a spring breeze. Then, he kissed her crazily. He pressed her on the sofa and forced her to kiss him. Just when he was about to take off her clothes, the door of the office was pushed open. The person who came in was the one with the plastic surgery face. Her name was Zhang Meng. She was wearing a white dress and barged into Yimu Bai and Wen Yuan's world. Yimu Bai was interrupted. His body floated above Wen Yuan, and his face darkened. Get lost, the girl begged. CEO Yi, please don't terminate the contract with me. I can get it back. It wasn't easy for her to get into Stars Entertainment, and she didn't want to walk out. Artists who terminated their contracts with Stars Entertainment would become useless, so she ignored the company's rules and barged into CEO Ye's office. She didn't expect there to be a woman in CEO Ye's office. She subconsciously thought that it was an unspoken rule because she didn't see clearly that it was Wen Yuan. Her voice was soft. CEO Yi, I can do it too. Can what? Yi Mubai sneered. Then he got up, walked to the office, and pressed the intercom. Secretary He, get security here. Zhang Meng is stunned. She's in a trance. Boss Yi, don't you like this face very much? Wen Yuan sat up and glared at Yi Mubai. What the fuck? He looked at her helplessly. At this moment, Lil Yi Hui woke up. She ran out of the lounge and threw herself into Wen Yuan's arms. Mommy. Wen Yuan hugged her. Little Yi Hui's voice was crisp. Mommy, are you sleeping outside with Daddy? Are you doing a mysterious mission? This was what her brother had told her. Wen Yuan couldn't answer such a shameful question, so he looked at Yi Mubai. The father said seriously, Yi Hui, only Daddy and Mommy can do this kind of mysterious mission. Yi Hui replied with an, oh, and returned to the lounge. Yi Mubai suppressed the desire that had just arisen and looked at Wen Yuan. His voice was especially gentle as he said, Go and accompany Yi Hui. I'll handle things here. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband addicted to pampering, talking about life, and looking for bosom friends. Chapter 3943. Oh, Wen Yuan replied and walked over. Only Yi Mubai and the girl named Zhang Meng were left in the office. At this time, the security guards came over. However, Yi Mubai told them not to take action. He just said calmly, I love my wife very much. I won't do anything unspoken. Also, the termination of the contract is the company's decision. It has nothing to do with personal reasons. I hope you understand. Zhang Meng looked at him with tears in her eyes. I thought the nightclub liked this face. I like my wife. Yi Mubai smiled slightly and then raised his hand. Miss Zhang, please leave. When Zhang Meng left, she left in tears. After she left, Suemo came over in a hurry. She must have heard the news just now. She was a little stunned and closed the door after a long time. CEO Yi. Yi Mubai looked at her. It's a pity. She's very talented. Suemo was silent for a while and then said in a low voice, she wanted to take the shortcut. In fact, not everyone was like Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan was the one who took the initiative, but Yi Mubai didn't have a wife. Now, that CEO Yi had a wife and a son and a daughter. What was the point of making her look like Lin Cece? After saying that, Suemo looked at Yi Mubai. The contract has been terminated. For humanitarian reasons, she didn't pay for the company's losses. Yi Mubai looked at her. Suemo smiled bitterly. I paid for her. Otherwise, how could a northerner have the money to pay for the liquidated damages? Moreover, it was a sky-high price. Yi Mubai glanced at her, walked to the desk, and sat down. He said calmly, Suemo, if you continue to be so generous, you may become very poor. I won't. Suemo smiled maliciously. Wen Yuan gave me 1% of Starlight Entertainment shares. After saying that, she smiled at Yimu Bai. I've long known that when Yuan is a spendthrift. After Su Mo left, Yimu Bai sat there for a while and then left. On the way back, Wen Yuan and Yi Hui sat in the back seat. Yimu Bai was focused on driving and occasionally glanced at Wen Yuan and Yi Hui. Wen Yuan's eyes met hers, and she immediately lowered her head. Together, they went to fetch Xiangnan home. After dinner, the father immediately threw Xiao Yi Hui to Xiangnan. Take care of little sister. Little sister will sleep with you tonight. Xiangnan, Daddy and Mommy are going to do another mysterious mission. Yimu Bai took Wen Yuan to the study. Unlike before, he pressed her against the door. Do you have anything to say to me? Wen Yuan looked at him and shook his head. No. He pinched her face. It's about squandering, HM? She held back her laughter. I really didn't. Suamo. He gave her another hint, his body leaning forward, hinting that if she didn't tell him, he was going to get serious. Wen Yuan finally confessed. I gave Suamo 1% of Starlight's shares. He stared at her for a few seconds, then released her and sat down on the sofa. Wen Yuan leaned against the door and looked at him silently for a while. Then he walked over and half knelt beside him. Are you angry? He turned his head and smiled faintly. No. He reached out and stroked her face. I know that you want to thank Suamo and help her. Why didn't you tell me? She didn't say anything. Later, he understood. He sighed and didn't say anything. He just reached out and gently stroked her hair. I know. If there's anything in the future, you can tell me directly. HM? She nodded and put her hand on his shoulder. She leaned her face close to him. You're really not angry anymore. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for confidence. Chapter 39:44. He glanced at her. His heart was soft, but he didn't show it on his face. What do you think? She coaxed him, which was rare. How can I not be angry? He leaned on the sofa and smiled lazily. Sit here. She blushed. She knew that he wanted to make up for what happened in the office. You don't want to? He looked at her and sighed. Then I'd better be angry. I just don't know if it will affect Suamo. After all, I have a boss who is in a bad mood and dissatisfied with Yuchio. Wen Yuan stared at him. Her eyes were full of tears. After hesitating for a long time, she put her hand on his shoulder and moved herself to sit on his lap. But before she sat down, his big palm cushioned her. She sat on his palm. She was wearing a dress, so it was a bit messy. Wen Yuan's face was very hot. She leaned her face on his shoulder and said in a trembling voice, Xiangnan and Yi Hui are not asleep yet. Xiangnan will take care of his sister. His fingers succeeded, and Wen Yuan also moaned. She was in a mess because of his teasing. He was still in the mood to chat. Last time you said that Yi Hui should go to the nursery. I thought about it. It seems that what my mother said is also very reasonable. It's better for Yi Hui to receive preschool education in advance. While he was talking, his fingers were not idle. Wen Yuan gritted her teeth. She couldn't hear it clearly. When she opened her mouth, her voice was like a kitten. What? He looked at her forehead, which was covered with fine sweat, and smiled gently. You should go to the nursery, huh? Wen Yuan was stunned and subconsciously objected. No, he chuckled, tormenting her even more. Wen Yuan bit his shoulder. Don't. No what? Don't you want Hui to go to school? Or don't you want to do this? He asked in her ear. Wen Yuan endured it. His eyes were wet, like an innocent deer. She pressed her face against his and said in a broken voice, I don't know. He kept teasing her, forcing her to say all kinds of shameful things. Wen Yuan was a very traditional-looking woman, and her personality was also very traditional. Every time they did it, her heart would turn red and her heart would race. Yimu Bai found it very interesting. Moreover, after such a long time, he still maintained a strong interest in their relationship. Even he himself was surprised, because according to a certain conclusion, no matter how beautiful a woman was, a man would lose his excitement after sleeping with her for a month. But he was different. He still wanted it every day. After a long time, she softened his arms and did not get up for a long time. He looked down at her and bit the tip of her nose. Useless thing. Wen Yuan blushed and reached down to grab his hand, wanting to pull his palm away. However, he chuckled in a low voice. This isn't enough to satisfy you, is it? Her eyes widened. You said you would let me go today? Did I? He smiled faintly. Just now, I think you agreed. For Su and Mo, for me, she blushed and looked at him. After a long time, she actually leaned down. Yi Mubai was surprised. Then, he gently grabbed her hair. Wen Yuan. She looked up, and he murmured, I can't bear to. Perhaps he was like all men in the past, and enjoyed it. But now that he loved her so much, he really couldn't bear to. He pulled her up and held her in his arms. He carefully stroked her head. Be good, I don't have to do this. Wen Yuan buried herself in his arms and said in a soft and hoarse voice, But I like it. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering, talking about life and looking for a confidant. Chapter 39:45. Yi Mubai was stunned. After a long time, he murmured in a trembling voice, Wen Yuan, you said you like it? Her face was slightly red, and she was quite shy. Didn't you say that many women like it? His mind was in a mess. What happened after that? Yi Mubai's mind was in a mess. He almost couldn't think. But in the end, he still pulled her into his arms in time. Later, she gently poked him in his arms. Yi Mubai. He hummed and looked down at her. He couldn't help but kiss her. After kissing her for a long time, he murmured, I feel very good. How about you? Wen Yuan leaned in his arms and said in a low voice, I'm fine. But she was a little embarrassed and couldn't say it out loud. But Yi Mubai knew. For Wen Yuan, it was very hard. He pressed her down and couldn't help but lower his head to kiss her. In the end, he couldn't help but hold her in his arms and treat her gently. Late at night, when Wen Yuan was asleep, Yi Mubai quietly looked at her sleeping face and let out a long sigh. What a prodigal. The next day, he went to the company without Wen Yuan. As soon as he arrived, he called Secretary He. Call Manager Su over. Secretary He smiled. Is it Manager Su Mo? Yi Mubai looked up. Secretary He smiled again and went to look for him. Su Mo came over in less than 10 minutes and sat opposite Yi Mubai. What's the matter, COE? What do you think? He glanced at her and took out a check from the drawer. He put it on the table and slowly pushed it over. Sumo took a look at it. 200 million. Transfer 1% of your assets to me, Yi Mubai said lightly. Sumo smiled. But 1% is more than 200 million. Don't be too greedy. Wen Yuan is a prodigal, but it doesn't mean that I will indulge you. Yi Mubai said very indifferently. I know you're short on money, but this is enough for you to live a few lifetimes without worrying about food or clothing, as long as you don't have such rotten intentions. He knew that it had not been easy for Su Mo in the past 2 years. Although she looked like a high-class white-collar worker, she had lost all her relatives in the past 2 years. She had opened a homeless home and adopted homeless elderly people and some animals. Other than her own salary, Wen Yuan was also the biggest spendthrift, and he was the biggest spendthrift. Su Mo had never told Wen Yuan about these things. She was smart. Yi Mubai didn't want Wen Yuan to know about these things. He didn't want Wen Yuan's life to be tainted by these things. So he had been indulging Yi Mo. Su Mo took the check and then threw a document on Yi Mubai's desk. Her voice was a little low. Only that idiot Wen Yuan didn't realize that you gave her 14 shares. I won't steal someone's love. She paused and said, CEO Yi, you're actually a good person. He had always been a good person, but under the guise of a businessman. Yi Mubai smiled. I used to work hard to advocate for the protection of animals and world peace, but now I realize that being an unscrupulous businessman has changed the world more. Come on. Su Mo exposed him. You just want to be an unscrupulous businessman so that Wen Yuan will worship you. But Wen Yuan still likes artistic youths. You have so much money, but it still can't make up for playing a song with him. These days, Wen Yuan seemed to be possessed. He became enthusiastic towards Yi Mubai again, and there were stars in his eyes. It was probably because of this that Yi Mubai was lit up. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering, talking about life, looking for confidence. Chapter 3946. Yi stared at Su Mo for a long time before he snorted. Really, although he didn't want to admit it, it was the truth. Su Mo smiled. CEO Yi, you know it best, don't you? This time, Yi only snorted and didn't bother to say a word to her. If it weren't for Wen Yuan, he would have fired this guy right now. Su Mo left Yi office and went to the bank to transfer the money. She had a small charity fund that she had been running for more than a year. She was at the end of her rope when she remembered the 1% that Wen Yuan had given her. She was very grateful to Wen Yuan. In the past 2 years, she had cheated Wen Yuan a lot. Wen Yuan had never refused her when she asked for money. Later, when he found out that she was very short of money, he simply gave her 1% and said that she could get a bonus of tens of thousands of yuan every year. Su Mo thought that maybe it was Wen Yuan's purity that made Yi like him. Wen Yuan was a very romantic person, but he hid it well and lived an ordinary life. However, after getting to know him, she realized that he didn't know anything about daily necessities. She had worked before, but she didn't have any concept of money. 1% of Starlight was worth about 1 billion yuan. She didn't even know that he had given it to her so easily. Su Mo was very envious of such a friend. She was even a little jealous, but she really liked Wen Yuan. 200 million was a great help to her. She transferred the money and was about to leave the bank when she remembered something. She dialed Kong Xiao's number. You haven't received the performance fee from last time. I asked your assistant, and she said it was your idea. Kong Xiao, I know you don't lack money, but business is business, okay? Kong Xiao thought for a moment and smiled. Okay. He met Su Mo in a cafe. When he arrived, Su Mo was already there. He sat opposite her and smiled. How long have you been here? I'm working here. Su Mo pushed a cup of coffee in front of him. Your favorite American coffee, no sugar. He chuckled. While drinking, Su Mo pushed a check in front of him. 5 million yuan, it's settled. Kong Xiao took it and smiled. The two of them drank coffee together and did not talk much. They knew each other because of Wen Yuan. Although they were close, they were not that close. However, he could feel that she liked him. As long as he didn't say it out loud, he wouldn't feel uncomfortable. Kong Xiao drank half a cup of coffee and said with a faint smile, I still have something to do, so I'll be leaving first. Thank you, Su Mo. He wanted to leave, but Su Mo suddenly reached out and stopped him. Wait a minute. She didn't know why. She suddenly wanted to confess. She didn't want to confess before because she knew how much Kong Xiao loved Wen Yuan. Su Mo held his hand and said in a low voice, just for a while, okay, Kong Xiao. He seemed to have sensed something as he lowered his head to look at her hand that was holding his. After a moment of hesitation, he sat down and said, Su Mo, there's something. She knew that he was rejecting her, but she just wanted to say it. Su Mo held the coffee cup and lowered her eyes. Her voice became even lower. I know I'm young and can't meet your standards. Kong Xiao sighed. That was my nonsense. I will not use this as a standard. Su Mo looked at him and said slowly, Kong Xiao, don't I have the slightest possibility? He stared at her and sighed. Su Mo, there's some stubbornness that even you can't control yourself. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talk about life and find a confidant. Chapter 3947. His refusal was very tactful, but Su Yao understood. She lowered her eyes and said in a very low voice, I know, Kong Xiao. I didn't give up. In fact, I knew the result. Maybe it's because the coffee tastes good today. She smiled at him, and it was a very bright smile. She was a very good girl. Kong Xiao knew that, but he didn't feel anything for her. He couldn't say too much sorry because he never needed to apologize if he didn't like her, just like how Wen Yuan treated him. He wanted to leave, but Su Mo said, she's very good. He paused. She and Yi have been very close recently. Yi has fallen in love with her. Kong Xiao, don't wait for her. Go find a girl to marry. You won't be able to wait for Wen Yuan. Su Mo smiled lightly. Kong Xiao still smiled slightly. I didn't deliberately wait. It's just that I haven't found a suitable one. I don't want to force myself, and I don't want to delay others." He got up and left. Sue Mo sat in the coffee shop under the afternoon sun. She sat there for the whole afternoon. She was heartbroken. She confessed, but the man didn't like her. She found Wen Yuan and wanted to eat and drink with him. Recently, Yihui had gone to school, so Wen Yuan was more free. It was okay to eat, but she didn't dare to drink because Yi Mubai would get angry. He would object to everything that he thought a woman shouldn't have. If she didn't change, he would get angry. So, when Wen Yuan brought it up, he was a little shaken. Sue Mo said that she broke up with her boyfriend and wants me to accompany her. Yi Mubai sat on the sofa and read a magazine. "It's going to be dinner soon. You can ask her to come here to eat." "Yi Mubai," Wen Yuan said a little fiercely. Sue Mo said she was heartbroken. "What's wrong with me asking her to come to our house?" He held the magazine and smiled. "Are you afraid that she will seduce me?" "Yi Mubai." Wen Yuan glared at him. "You're talking nonsense." He put down the magazine, crossed his hands, and coughed softly. "Then tell me, she was heartbroken. Why didn't I hear that she was in love before? Who was she heartbroken with?" Wen Yuan looked at him blankly. "I didn't ask. Shouldn't I ask this later?" He pulled her into his arms and let her lie on his lap. He punched her butt. "Do you know who she met today?" Wen Yuan pretended not to understand. Yi Mubai lifted her chin. "It's Kong Xiao." "Madam Yi, do you think I'll let you go to her and let her talk with you all night about Concho?" Wen Yuan looked at him and said, "Then, are we just going to ignore her?" "Mubai, Sue Mo is my friend." She added, "Sue Mo doesn't have many friends." He snorted coldly. "That's because she has a weird temper and is greedy for money. All of her friends have been cheated. Only a fool like Wen Yuan, who had a mountain of gold and silver in his family that Sue Mo had swindled out of, was able to preserve their friendship." After he said this, Wen Yuan was stunned. After a long time, he said, "Yi Mubai, Sue Mo isn't that kind of person." He gazed at her and smiled faintly. "You can ask her yourself, but she's also very stupid." Wen Yuan thought that he would not agree, but Yi Mubai changed his tone and said, "You can go, but Wen Yuan, don't drink, or I'll break your legs when I come back. You only know how to use domestic violence." She muttered discontentedly. Then he smiled. "When my brother and Shirley got married, they fought fiercely. Wen Yuan, do you want me to show you what real domestic violence is? I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for confidence." Chapter 39:48. Wen Yuan stared at him with an infuriating gaze. He smiled and got up. "Where are you going?" "I'll take you there." She pulled him. "No, I'll drive myself." Yi Mubai leaned forward and bit the tip of her nose. "Mrs. Yi, this is one of the conditions. Otherwise, there will be no benefits." Wen Yuan looked at him. "But you had a meeting the whole afternoon today. Don't go if you feel sorry for me." He looked at her and smiled. Wen Yuan got up. "I'll go upstairs to change." He pulled her. She turned around. "What's wrong?" Yi Mubai's voice was hoarse. "Dress conservatively." Wen Yuan smiled and turned to go upstairs. When he went downstairs, he changed into a set of very casual clothes and tied his hair into a ponytail. He was very satisfied with it. In the car, Wen Yuan looked at his handsome side profile from time to time. "Are you angry?" He gestured and smiled. "Yes, I'm angry. You've been working hard all day, and your wife has to accompany someone else." Wen Yuan was unhappy. "I'm with you every day." Now that she thought about it, she felt that something was wrong. She was now like a pendant on his body. He took her everywhere he went. Yihui was sent to school by him, but she went to his company every day to report. When she didn't want to go, he would say that the incident with Zhang Meng meant that she didn't go to his company often, which was why there was a misunderstanding. Wen Yuan felt that he was very diligent. It was obvious that he wanted someone to accompany him every day. Every time she made up her mind not to go to the company with him, he always had a way to torture her in bed. She either went to the company or in bed. Wen Yuan missed her husband so much that he was not so powerful because he was too tired. The more she thought about it, the less she wanted to talk to him. She turned her face to the side. Yi Mubai looked at her and said softly, "Right now, You're indirectly interacting with someone who likes you. Wen Yuan, I'm not angry yet. Why are you angry? She stared at him. He was really good at changing the concept, and Wen Yuan couldn't defend himself. Later, she ignored him in a fit of pique until he sent her to a fish house. He unfastened her seatbelt and smiled. No drinking. When Wen Yuan got out of the car and closed the door, he stuck out his tongue at him. I just drink. He found it funny and infuriating at the same time. This was the first time when Yuan acted like this. But it felt good. Yi Mubai originally wanted to drive back, but thinking that the Annies at home were all there, he was too lazy to drive back, so he directly waited for Wen Yuan here. Although he was also very familiar with Su and Mo, he was not interested in two women having a meal together, especially when the male lead was Kong Xiao. The reason why he was so generous was because their relationship had been good recently. He sat in the car, smoked a few cigarettes, and then scrolled through his phone. Wen Yuan didn't know that he didn't leave, so he went to find Su Immo. Su Immo sat in the corner and ordered a platter, waiting to be served. What surprised Wen Yuan was that Su Immo actually ordered ergo too. Wen Yuan sat down, and Su Immo looked up at her before pouring himself a glass of ergo too. He then looked at Wen Yuan and said, "You drink. Pour it for me as well." Wen Yuan said indifferently. Sumo's hand that was holding the bottle trembled. "Aren't you afraid that Yi Mubai will skin you alive?" Wen Yuan looked at Su Immo. "What I'm most afraid of is him taking off my clothes." After she said that, Su Immo laughed and trembled. "Wen Yuan, is it true? I'm not lying to you. He's very good." Wen Yuan poured himself a glass. "If he doesn't let me drink, I'll drink it. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life, looking for confidence." Chapter 39-49. Suemo looked at Wen Yuan blankly and said after a long time, "Aren't you afraid that your CEO you will take off your clothes?" "I'm not afraid." Wen Yuan took a sip of wine and felt that it was spicy. Then she complained, "He will take it off every day anyway." She raised her glass and clinked it with Su and Mo. "Don't think too highly of men. They're not good people. It's better to be single." Su and Mo clinked her glass with Wen Yuan and watched him take another sip. She felt that something was wrong. She was the one who wanted to drown her sorrows, so why did Wen Yuan drink it? She coughed lightly. "There are many women who want CEO you to take off their clothes. Wen Yuan, don't take it for granted." Then Suemo looked down at her airport. "Look, I'm being despised by others. Xiong Xiao. I don't even know if he's a little boy or not." Wen Yuan laughed. Then she leaned over and whispered, "When I was learning piano with Kong Xiao's mother, many of Kong Xiao's schoolmates chased after him. Their school was circulating about Kong Xiao's nude photos." "It's true, Suemo. You can look forward to it." Suemo looked at Wen Yuan suspiciously. "You know about this?" "My teacher will tell me." Wen Yuan smiled and began to brush the fish. "Maybe my teacher wanted to mess with us at that time, but you know what happened later?" Suemo was stunned for a long time before she said in a low voice, "I thought Kong Xiao's mother was arrogant because of the Kong family's scholarly background. My teacher can be very avant-garde sometimes." Wen Yuan sighed softly, feeling a little nostalgic. It had been a long time since she last saw her teacher. She heard that her teacher was not in good health and wanted to visit him, but she was afraid that Yi Mubai would be unhappy, so Wen Yuan didn't dare to mention it. Now that she thought about it, she felt sorry for her teacher. But Sumo's focus wasn't on this. She asked in a low voice, "So Kong Xiao's mother taught you to take the risk and plot to sleep with Yi Mubai? Lower your voice." Wen Yuan looked around. "No, I just wanted to be with him. As long as I loved him, it didn't matter if he loved me or not. But later, I realized that it's very painful not to be loved." Sumo. She placed her hand on the back of Sumo's hand. "Promise me that you'll treat yourself well. Don't force yourself. It's good to be free sometimes." Sumo's throat felt a little sore as he nodded. "I understand." The two of them fell silent for a while. After eating some fish and drinking some wine, Suemo smiled and said, "I won't settle for a man who thinks I'm too small." Wen Yuan was right. Suemo said, "I want to go to Longxiong." Wen Yuan was speechless. Suemo said, "I'm not ugly. There are a lot of people chasing after me from here to France. He didn't like me, so I slept with him and then kicked him away. Wen Yuan was also a little drunk. He held Sumo's arm and said, "That's right, sleep with him." She rested her face on Sumo's arm. "Remember to wear a t-shirt. Otherwise, it'll be bad if you get pregnant like me." "I don't want to get married," she murmured. "I have to get married. I still have to endure a man with a bad temper. I even have to let him strip me every day and play all kinds of mysterious games. He's too perverted." Sumo was not completely drunk. She could hold her liquor well because she was a girl from the north. She was dumbfounded. Then, she quickly took out her phone and set it to recording mode. "Wen Yuan, what hobbies does Yimubai have? I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for confidence." Chapter 3950. Wen Yuan lay on his stomach and laughed like a little girl. After a long time, he spat out a few words. "He likes to do it from behind, especially, and he likes to grab my hair. I'm almost bald here." Sumo's heart was trembling. Wow, that was so exciting. She cleared her throat. "How many times can your CEO do it in a night? How many times?" Wen Yuan shook his head. "I haven't counted, but he is very perverted. He won't let me sleep. Once, he didn't stop from 2 to 6 in the morning. I'm so tired. Sumo, there's nothing good about marriage. It's over if you meet a pervert." Sumo sighed. "You obviously enjoy it." She grabbed her hair. A well-fed man doesn't know the suffering of a starving man. Sumo made Wen Yuan drunk, and she didn't know what to do. She didn't expect Wen Yuan's alcohol tolerance to be so bad. Now, she could only call Yimubai and brace herself to say that Wen Yuan was drunk. In less than 5 minutes, her president Yi magically appeared. Sumo looked at him and stuttered. "CEO Yi, you are here." Yimubai stood and looked at his wife, who was drunk like mud. Sumo was fine. Sumo worked in public relations. Not to mention being able to drink 1,000 cups of wine, she could easily knock out 3 or 4 men. Wen Yuan was really a pig for drinking erguotu with her. Yimubai looked at Sumo and said calmly, "I forgot to tell you that Kong Xiao is also in this restaurant on the 3rd floor." Sumo was stunned. What a coincidence. After Yimubai finished speaking, he carried his wife in his arms. How embarrassing. How could she eat herself to such an extent while drinking hot pot? When he walked out, Sumo called out to him, "By the way, CEO Yi, I have a gift for you. I'll send you a message." He looked at her and snorted. "It had better be to my satisfaction." Sumo put on a fake smile and said ambiguously, "The nightclub will be satisfied." Yimubai walked out and carried Wen Yuan into the car. Then, he received Sumo's so-called gift. It was a voice message. He thought about it and opened it. Wen Yuan's voice came out along with Sumo's voice. "He likes to do it from behind, especially, and he likes to grab my hair. I'm almost bald. How many times can your CEO do it in one night? I haven't counted, but he's especially perverted. He won't let me sleep. Once, he didn't stop from 2 in the morning until 6 in the morning. I'm so tired. Sumo, there's nothing good about marriage. If you meet a pervert, it's over. You clearly enjoy it." Yimubai listened a few times, then turned his head to look at the drunk cat beside him. He smiled faintly and started the car. When he returned home, he was in a good mood. He had already thought of a way to teach her a lesson. He would say that he liked to do it from behind. He remembered that she was the one who liked it the most when he tortured her from behind. She liked to do it to him. After Yimubai took Wen Yuan away, Sumo sat alone. She did not leave immediately, but chose to sit there and drink. She drank 4 bottles of erguotu and got herself drunk. Later, she vomited on the other side of the road. She lay there and vomited terribly. In fact, it was not the first time she did this. Many times, she had to drink a lot when dealing with clients. Once, she even slept on the street. When she woke up the next day, there were a few 10 yuan bills beside her. They were given by a few children who treated her like a homeless person. When she sat up, she smelled the stench on her body. She felt that she was no different from the roadside. This time, she only wanted to get drunk for herself. She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband, addicted to pampering. talking about life and looking for bosom friends. Chapter 39:51. When Kong Xiao was about to drive away, he suddenly saw a familiar figure. It was Su Mo. She was wearing the bourgeois clothes he saw today, which cost tens of thousands, but she was lying on the side of the road like a cat or dog. Kong Xiao stopped the car, jumped out, and walked straight to Su Mo. Su Mo was wearing a suit that cost tens of thousands of yuan. She climbed on the divider like a monkey and looked at him with a silly smile. She was really drunk, but she knew him. Kong Xiao looked at the traffic around and frowned. Su Mo, come here. She refused and refused to get down. She shouted at him, I'm very young. I won't meet a pervert on the road. Kong Xiao was helpless. Come down, I'll take you home. Su Mo looked at him. I'll go with you if you take me home. Kong Xiao thought for a moment and nodded. Come down, I'll take you home. He reached out to pick her up. When Su Mo threw herself into his arms, she bit her lip. I want to make love to you. Kong Xiao hugged her. At this moment, he was a little embarrassed. Then he scolded her. Girls shouldn't say such things. You're not a good person. Su Mo put her arms around his neck. I'll do anything to get what I want. Are you sure you still want to take me home? Kong Xiao carried her all the way to the car. He wasn't alone in the car. There was a very decent woman in the car. Su Mo was drunk, but she also knew that it was a woman sitting in the passenger seat. She was so embarrassed that she wanted to get out of the car and drive back by herself. Kong Xiao fastened the seat belt and said coldly, Believe it or not, I'll really throw you out of here if you keep making trouble. Su Mo stopped and then looked at the woman in front of her. She felt that she was very beautiful and big from the side. She didn't say anything and lay in the back obediently. After a while, she muttered, Don't you like when Yuan very much? Kong Xiao, you're such a hypocrite. Is she your sex friend? After she finished speaking, the atmosphere in the car was quite strange. Kong Xiao could only apologize to the woman beside him. She drank too much. The woman didn't care much. Just drop me off at the intersection. Kong Xiao, we'll talk about the specific cooperation next time. She smiled. You may have some personal affairs to deal with now. Kong Xiao sighed. Just a friend. She likes you. The woman hit the nail on the head. Kong Xiao didn't say anything. She stopped the car in front of them and got out to send them off before getting back into the car. Su Mo had already fallen asleep in the back seat of his car. He frowned and wanted to ask her where she lived, but after thinking about it, he decided to let her stay for one night. He drove back to his apartment, which was located on the top floor of a certain apartment in the elite area of B City. It was about 200 square meters and very spacious for one person to live in. In fact, he was rarely in B City and spent most of his time flying around the world. Su Mo had fallen asleep and was still holding on to her bag. He carried her out of the car and kicked the door shut. When they arrived at his apartment, he brought her to the guest room without hesitation. He thought that she would be well behaved, but as soon as she laid down, she tugged at her clothes and said that it was hot and that she wanted to take a bath. Kong Xiao's temper was considered good. He patiently filled the bathtub with hot water and carried her in. Soak yourself for a while. Call me when you're done. Su Mo sat on the floor and looked at him pitifully. Aren't you going to help me take off my clothes? Wen Yuan said that Yi Mubai likes to take off her clothes the most. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Husband addicted to pampering. Talking about life and looking for confidence. Chapter 39:52. Kong Xiao's eyes darkened, but he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he squatted down and looked into her eyes. Su Mo, don't try to provoke me. It's not good for a woman to flirt with a man. Su Mo knelt on the ground and straightened her body. She grabbed his tie and pulled him in front of her. She leaned in and said, You don't dare, do you? Kong Xiao, aren't you still a virgin? He stared at her with a deep gaze. Su Mo was still provoking him. Do you know how it feels to be a woman? She put his hand on her waist and let him hug her. I have everything except for my breasts. Kong Xiao, do you want to try? His Adam's apple moved slightly, and he threw her into the bathtub. You need to wake up. Su Mo screamed in the water. I don't know how to swim. He didn't want to talk to her, but in the end, his heart softened. He turned around and glared at her. Su Mo, Don't you have any shame? She rushed out of the water, and Kong Xiao was stunned. Where were her clothes? Su Imo slowly walked out of the bathtub and slowly walked to his side. Before he could react, she hugged his neck and kissed him. After a while, she moved to his Adam's apple and bit it. I heard from Wen Yuan that your nude photos are I really want to see them. Kong Xiao was shocked and angry. Su Imo, are you still a woman? You can check. She was drunk and had been rejected. Anyway, there was nothing worse than this. Wen Yuan was right. It was good that she couldn't sleep with him. Moreover, a drunk Su Imo was a hooligan. She touched everywhere. Kong Xiao grabbed her hand and put it behind her back. He said in a low voice, "Don't play with fire. Otherwise, you won't be able to bear it." Sumo's fingers slowly moved down, and under his gaze, it wasn't her first time. That man had left her when something happened to her family. At that time, Su Imo had decided not to love any bastard anymore. However, she fell in love with Kong Xiao. It was probably because of his obsession with Wen Yuan. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they were like lightning and fire. Kong Xiao was not gentle. When it came to such matters, he gave off a completely different vibe than usual. He was forceful and even rough. He threw her onto the soft bed and did it again and again. That night, Su Imo begged for mercy until her voice was hoarse, but he still didn't let her go. By the time it was over, it was already 2 a.m. He leaned against the bed and smoked. Su Imo moved a little under the blanket, and he lowered his gaze. "Are you sober now?" Su Imo pulled up the blanket and looked at it. What Wen Yuan said is true. Kong Xiao put out the cigarette and said calmly, "I won't take responsibility." Although Su Imo had already known that she would only sleep with him once, she still felt a little hurt when she heard this. She forced a smile and said, "I know, I was the one who took the initiative." At that time, she had been so proactive. Only a man would be able to hold himself back. She knew that she was not ugly. Although her figure was flat, she was still somewhat seductive because she was thin. Kong Xiao looked at her silently for a moment and suddenly said, "Don't worry about getting pregnant. I've taken precautions." Sumo's face was burning as though she had been slapped. She lowered her gaze. "Are you afraid that I'll cling to you?" "No, I just don't want to lose another innocent life before I think it through. Just for a night of pleasure," he said calmly before lifting the blanket and getting up. He put on his trousers and was about to return to his bedroom. "Let's leave at daybreak. I want to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Hubby, addicted to pampering, talking about life and looking for bosom friends." Chapter 39:53. He had only taken a few steps when Su Imo immediately got off the bed and hugged him from behind. She shamelessly used the humblest tone she had ever used in her life and let go of all her pride. "Is it really impossible between us?" He did not turn around and only said, "I have a condom here. Su Imo, you're an adult, so you should understand that I'm not a pure man. I have a woman. It was just a special woman. He might call her once a month, and she was of a higher class." Sumo's grip loosened, and she was stunned. She had not expected such an answer. She had always thought that a man like Kong Xiao would be especially clean. Hadn't he always been waiting for Wen Yuan? He turned around. "I do like Wen Yuan, but she's already someone else's wife. I won't have any improper thoughts." "So, you've always had women, and the kind that you bought with money?" Su Imo felt as if she had swallowed a fly and was disgusted. He nodded before looking at her. "I told you a long time ago that it's not good to play around with men. Su Imo, I'm not the perfect man you think I am, and I'm not Prince Charming either. I'm just an ordinary man with lust, and I'll be able to differentiate between flesh and soul." He paused. "If you feel that I'm suitable, you can come to me again." Su Imo was disgusted. She covered the blanket in front of her and said with a trembling voice, "Did you plan to spend the night with the woman in the car today?" "No," he replied quickly, "but I've had sex with her twice." "Su Imo, you're also in the entertainment industry. Isn't this normal? We take what we need and get together because of benefits. Once the benefits are over, we separate." Su Imo laughed. She took a lighter from the bed and lit up another cigarette. She took a deep puff and said, "So, Wen Yuan is the white moonlight in your heart. She's very clean, So you want to marry her. Kong Xiao. Do you think you're worthy of Wen Yuan when you're so dirty? You've slept with so many women, and perhaps many of them are old women. Su Mo's hand that was holding the cigarette was trembling, and her voice was almost hysterical. You don't deserve to like Wen Yuan at all. You still want her to pursue her dream and sleep with anyone like you? Kong Xiao looked at her calmly. Su Mo, have you ever sold your own body? Su Mo stared at him and took a few more drags of the cigarette. Then she pressed the cigarette butt out. She got off the bed and walked straight to him. She raised her hand and slapped him in the face. Then tears welled up in her eyes. I only sell my skills, not my body. Kong Xiao, you listen to me. Tonight I've been a prostitute. You name your price. He didn't say anything. She took out a checkbook from her bag and wrote a few numbers on it. 1 million. You're worth this much. She threw it to him and took 2 steps back. Her eyes were bloodshot. She felt that he was even worse than her first love. That man just didn't want to take it. On the other hand, Kong Xiao slept with so many people in order to become famous and gain what he needed. She knew too well what kind of people slept with him when they just entered the circle. She had always thought that Kong Xiao was clean. As it turned out, he was already so dirty that he could not be seen. Su Mo didn't cry. She just felt disgusted. She was bitten by a dog, and she was the one who took the initiative. She went to the bathroom and took her clothes out of the water. She put them on while they were wet. She rushed out of his bedroom with her bag. She had to leave in the middle of the night. She couldn't stay with such a man, not even for a minute. She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1. Hubby addicted to pampering. On WeChat, she followed Yuta literature, talking about life, looking for bosom friends. Chapter 39:54. When she reached the door, her arm was caught, and she was brought into a firm embrace. He lowered his head and looked at her with a contorted face. You've seen the true side of me. Are you disgusted? His fingers caressed her face gently as he said hoarsely, weren't you satisfied with my performance when you moaned so happily earlier on? Suamo looked at him and patted him. Let go of me, Kong Xiao. Let go of me. At this moment, she was a little afraid. She felt as though she had seen a demon. Kong Xiao was not like this, and she did not want to listen anymore because it was too disgusting. He held her down easily with one arm as he leaned over and said in a low voice, You're disgusting. You slept with me too, Suamo. I've already said that you should stay away from me. A man like me will never give in unless I'm willing. Then you can just wait to be slept with by old women one after another. She roared at him, her voice almost tearing her heart out. The next second, she was thrown onto the bed. Kong Xiao stood by the bed and looked at her coldly. It's not what you think it is. Are you angry from embarrassment? Suamo, I'm very expensive. I'm not interested in $1 million. In front of her, he tore the check into shreds and said in a cold voice, Don't worry, I won't touch you again. I don't lack women, and I'm not the kind of person you think I am. Suamo, we've never interacted before, and you're not a child anymore. Isn't this kind of love between a man and a woman supposed to be consensual? Suamo bit her lips and looked at his expressionless face. This Kong Xiao was the real Kong Xiao, a top-notch celebrity who had been in the entertainment industry for many years. Suddenly, she laughed. That's right, she was really silly. Other than someone with a family background like Yi Mubai's, how could anyone else leave with a clean conscience? It was impossible to obtain a Vanity Fair like this without paying a price. She smiled at him and did not say anything, but tears flowed down from the corner of her eyes. She was still a little upset, but she did not know what she was upset about. Actually, Kong Xiao was right. The industry was like this. It was normal for him to pursue fame and fortune. It was her brain that short-circuited. She had forgotten what Yi Mubai had said to her. He had said, Don't look for a man from the entertainment industry. Su Mo wiped his tears and said, Kong Xiao, don't worry. Today's matter ends here. I won't slander you. You can still be the prince of the violin, but don't hang around Wen Yuan anymore. You really don't deserve her. Yi Mubai is the most suitable person for her. Because of his background? Kong Xiao asked coldly. Suamo smiled. That's right. Some things are destined by the heavens. There's nothing we can do about it. Just like herself, Her family background was not something that she could choose for herself. However, she did not sell her body and only slept with the men she liked. Kong Xiao was her second man. It was disgusting. She undressed, went to the bathroom to shower, and climbed under the covers when she returned. After a while, the voice said, "Thank you for taking me in. I will leave tomorrow morning." Concho stood at the foot of the bed, frowning. Suemo did not say anything else. He just lay there quietly. He stood there for a while before returning to his bedroom. After returning to his bedroom and lying on the bed, Kong Xiao's emotions could not calm down for a long time. Today, he had lost his composure. He could have not told Suemo these things that no one knew about. These were the secrets of the entertainment industry, but he did not expect Suemo to be so different. Chapter 39:55. Every time she looked at him, it was as if she was looking at a saint. Kong Xiao knew exactly what she thought of him. He found it a little ridiculous. He had never been in love with her because she wasn't his type and she couldn't afford to play around. However, when she hugged the fence and told him that she wanted to go home with him, he was tempted. The little devil in his heart wanted to tear away the layer of hope in her heart. He wanted to see how she would react after knowing what kind of person he was. It would be interesting. In the end, she cried. Actually, it was quite good. She wouldn't look at him like that anymore. It was annoying. He had never been a perfect person. She didn't have to be like that. The feeling of tearing her little heart apart with his own hands was subtle and satisfying. Of course, her body was unexpectedly soft and immature. She probably hadn't had a man for a long time. When he first took her, she was in pain. Her subtle expression couldn't fool him. Kong Xiao had a strange feeling in his heart. He convinced himself that it was the first time he met such a stupid woman who thought the world was so beautiful. He sneered and closed his eyes to sleep. At dawn, Kong Xiao got up. He felt that something was missing in the air. He got up and went to the guest room. Suemo was no longer there. She still wore those wet clothes and left, taking everything here with her, including the t-shirt he had used. This was the first time a woman was willing to clean up the battlefield, but he had an indescribable feeling. He guessed that she didn't want to leave any traces. She didn't want to admit that they had done it. That was it. He stood there quietly, watching her leave, fleeing in panic. He was very dirty. Other than Wen Yuan, who was the white moon in his heart, he could only watch from afar. And now, he didn't want to touch Suemo. If sleeping with her once could make her smart enough to run far away. He went back to the bedroom to sleep. However, he couldn't fall asleep after lying on the bed. The moment he closed his eyes, he thought of Suemo lying under him. She wasn't the most beautiful, but she was especially seductive when she took the initiative. That was why he came again and again last night. However, there wouldn't be a next time. Kong Xiao was a man who followed the rules of the game. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to survive in this circle. Unable to fall asleep, he simply sat up, lit a cigarette, and smoked quietly. Asterisk in the master bedroom on the second floor of the villa. Yimubai had woken up a long time ago and had been staring at his wife. Wen Yuan was still asleep. He reached out and gently scratched her face. She still didn't wake up. Instead, she turned over and curled up in his arms, wrapping one arm around his neck. Wen Yuan. He leaned over and nibbled on her ear. Wen Yuan was woken up by him. She had a bad temper recently, so she bit the tip of his nose hard and accidentally tore it. Yimubai felt the pain and reached out to grab her hair and pull her back. Wen Yuan, you're a puppy. She was still sleepy, so she buried her face in his chest and pressed her warm lips against his chest, causing Yimubai's blood to boil. He grabbed her and refused to let her bury her face in his chest. Went at him. She wanted to at him. At him sick. She had to say. At him as he wanted to say. When as she had at as she wanted. As at her at it when you on. And she wanted to get her. Chapter 39:56. Wen Yuan was fully awake. She looked at the place where she had bitten. It was red and swollen. She bit her lip and coughed. Who told you to wake me up so early in the morning? He was still staring at her. You heard it. She looked at him speechless, and then stared at him in it. What do you want? Yimubai gently grabbed her hair and moved it closer. I wanted to stop hurting. When Yuan's face was buried there, she screamed, Yimubai, you are a pervert. He laughed in a low voice, very happy, and pulled her head to look at him again. Do you dare to do this again? She didn't say anything, but buried her face in his mouth and let him nibble on it. It was a kind of healing. He felt a little itchy, and his voice almost trembled. Wen Yuan, I don't like it. I don't like it anymore. She smiled naughtily, hugging his neck with her arms, and said in a coquettish voice. He lowered his head, stared at her, and then pressed her down. He kissed her hard for a long time, and then said breathlessly, You're killing me. Go on. Wen Yuan murmured, I thought you didn't like it. He closed his eyes to enjoy it, and his voice was vague. All men like it. He made a sound as if he was in pain. Wen Yuan couldn't go on anymore. She leaned over and said warmly, Yimubai, you're even more promiscuous than a woman. He opened his eyes and stared at her for a while. Then he took the phone from the bedside, turned the volume to the maximum, and played a conversation. He likes to do it from behind, especially, and he likes to grab my hair. I'm almost bald here. How many times can he do it in one night? I haven't counted, but he is very perverted. He doesn't let me sleep. Once, he didn't stop from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm so tired. Sumo. Before she finished playing, Wen Yuan grabbed the phone and hung up. She blushed and gritted her teeth. You are so hateful. Mr. Yi looked at her lazily. Isn't it Sumo who told me? Why don't you talk about her? Wen Yuan thought of Sumo and hurriedly asked, How did she get back yesterday? She can hold her liquor very well, unless she wants to get drunk. But last night, Kang Xiao was also in that shop. You didn't see him? As Yimubai spoke, he began to work neatly. He whispered into her ear, Be quiet later. Don't moan so recklessly, okay? Her face was red and her heart was beating fast. She pushed him, I'm talking to you about something serious. He chuckled, hugged her from behind, and bit her ear. Is this your favorite? Wen Yuan's face was so red that it was about to bleed. He reached out his hand and said, Yimubai, you don't be like this. Didn't you say I liked it the most? He leaned against her back and sprinkled a string of small kisses on her shoulders, teasing her until she begged for mercy like a little kitten. He admired her anxious look, but he still did not let her go. You said I like to grab your hair. Wen Yuan, my hair is going bald because of you. Do you want to see? She said no, praised him with all her might, and told him all the things that he loved to hear. Yimubai was still laughing in a low voice, torturing her to death. After that, Wen Yuan soaked in the bathtub and scolded Sumo in his heart. Then he gritted his teeth and thought that she had served him so well just now, and he didn't let her go. Chapter 39:57. Wen Yuan took out his phone and dialed Sumo's number. Sumo took a long time to answer. Wen Yuan wanted to ridicule her, but Sumo's voice was so hoarse that she couldn't help but be a little stunned. Sumo, what's wrong with you? Sumo rubbed her nose. Nothing, I just caught a cold. Wen Yuan nodded and then remembered something. By the way, did you give the recording to Yimubai? Sumo smiled and said bitterly, Didn't it increase our feelings? You were tortured, weren't you? Wen Yuan wanted to say something, but he felt that Sumo was strange, so he only said that they would have coffee next time. But when he hung up the phone, he remembered that Yimubai said that Kang Xiao was also there. She should ask Sumo if she had seen him later. Just when she was about to call him, Yimubai came in. He was already neatly dressed and walking towards her. Wen Yuan admitted that she used to be his dog for appearances, and now it seemed that she still was. Yimubai squatted down and looked at her puppy-like expression. He smiled and said, Are you going to send Xiangnan and Yi Hui with me, or are you going to stay at home and bring me lunch? I want to sleep for a while more. My head is still a little dizzy. She went to hug him, and he let her hug him. After a while, he deliberately frowned. You made me wet. Should I take a bath too? She immediately stopped herself and said no. He was really hot at any time. Yimubai smiled and stopped teasing her. He said in a hoarse voice, Then I'll go first. He scratched her face again. If I still do this to you at night, you'll be good. She remembered how she was tortured by him from behind, and her face was extremely red. She pulled his hand. Mubai, there's something I want to tell you. He grunted and reached his hand into the bathtub. He grasped it in a few strokes and played with it from time to time. She had a favor to ask of him, so even if he went too far, she still let him be. She said softly, "Teacher is not in good health. I want to see her." He was surprised. Kong Xiao's mother? Then he added, "Didn't you just see her?" She looked at him and moved closer to his hand to please him. She hung her hands around his neck. Mubai, teacher is sick. I should go and see her. His hands were not idle. He pondered for a while and said, "I'll go with you." When? She was shocked and frowned. Isn't that bad? What's not good about it? He squeezed hard, and Wen Yuan immediately cried out, but she did not dare to struggle and obediently let him touch her until he pleased her. Perhaps because of her good attitude, Yimubai didn't reject her immediately. Tomorrow morning, I'll ask Secretary to spare some time. I can't do it today. I have to discuss a collaboration with CEO Qin of King Entertainment. When Yuan hummed, "Is it Qin Mo?" He finally retracted his hand and lowered his gaze to look at his fingers. When Yuan bit his lower lip and felt very embarrassed. He leaned over to kiss her and wrote a few words on her back. She was startled. His voice was low and pleasant. "You still say you don't like it, huh?" She let him do whatever he wanted and continued to act coquettishly in his arms. "Mubai, can you do it? I'll go with you tomorrow morning." He did not allow her to refuse and kissed her. Wen Yuan did not say anything. She was a little unhappy, but since he was willing to go with her, it was fine. It was good to let teacher see him. Chapter 39:58. Yi Mubai raised his hand to look at the time and smiled. He gently pressed his finger on her lips, hinting that when Yuan's face turned red. "I'm leaving. I'll go to the company at noon. Okay?" He finally got up and left. Wen Yuan watched his back as he slid into the bathtub again. She felt ashamed when she thought about how he had treated her just now. When did she become so accommodating? Wen Yuan soaked for a while more and got up. She put on a bathrobe and thought about it before calling Suimo. Suimo was busy. She called a few more times but couldn't get through, so she could only give up. When she went to the company at noon, she specially asked Secretary He asked about it and said that Manager Su had a cold and was on leave. When Secretary He mentioned this, he smiled. This isn't Manager Su's style. Manager Su used to be called Su San Fight. He didn't treat colds as illnesses and drank alcohol, as usual. I guess his health isn't as good as before. When Yuan thanked him and came back from Secretary's place, Yi Mubai had already finished his work and was sitting on the sofa waiting for Wen Yuan to eat. When she came back, she gave him a cold shoulder. He couldn't help but laugh. "What's wrong now?" he said lazily. "Did you not feel comfortable serving me in the morning?" Wen Yuan sat beside him and began to work on the lunchbox. She glanced at him. "I was the one who served you." Yi Mubai smiled and then hooked her chin. "Isn't it good that you didn't even have breakfast?" He was really vulgar. Wen Yuan looked away. "Let's eat." He smiled and ate with her. After a while, Wen Yuan still asked him, "Suimo, can you let her drink less in the future? You're blaming me?" He smiled lazily and then reached out to grab Wen Yuan. "I remember that Mrs. Yi isn't that kind, nor is she overflowing with love." Wen Yuan looked at him. "It's not easy for Suimo, yes. So you have to do what you can," Yi Mubai said coldly. "If she continues like this, she will kill herself one day." Wen Yuan looked at him. What's wrong with her? He didn't want to tell her. He didn't want her to come into contact with those things. In his heart, Wen Yuanhe should live in a greenhouse forever. She only needed to stay by his side, gracefully and beautifully. Yi Mubai smiled. "It's nothing. She just likes to help others. She's a bit stupid." He paused for a moment. Su Mo paid for Zhang Meng's breach of contract. Wen Yuan bit his lip. "Can't you just not accept her? She doesn't have to work so hard. He will be defeated sooner or later." He pinched her face and said in a low and husky voice, "Wen Yuan, personal relationships are personal relationships, but you can't have them at work. Do you understand?" She just looked at him and said nothing. Angry again? Pinching her cheeks, He thought for a moment and said, "She needs money, so she transferred 1% in Starlight's shares to me. 200 million, so she doesn't need to drink too much for now." Wen Yuan pursed his lips. "But there's always a time to spend money." He patted her. "That's 200 million, Mrs. Yi." She looked at him eagerly. "Is 200 million a lot?" He looked at her with a strange expression. After a while, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. When he let go of her, he hummed. "You did it on purpose, didn't you?" Wen Yuan laughed. He hummed and let go of her and began to eat. Wen Yuan lay in his arms and said in a low voice, "Are you angry?" Chapter 39:59. He looked at her and took her down. "Be good and eat." She refused to hug him from behind. She buried her face in his back and nibbled on his muscles through the fabric of his shirt. Yimu Bai paused and then looked at her. "Wen Yuan, it's okay if you don't want to eat." She immediately stopped making a fuss and obediently ate with him. Yimu Bai glanced at her and suddenly said, "I don't want to be like Su Mo, Wen Yuan. I'd rather be selfish." He sighed. "That will be hard." Wen Yuan looked at him. "Can't she change?" "She can't. I've told her many times not to worry about things that she can't control, but she's still so kind. But there's a way." He looked at her. Wen Yuan nodded. "What is it?" "Find her a rich long-term meal ticket," he said softly. She let out an ah and looked at him. He smiled and then said meaningfully, "Kong Xiao is not bad. Doesn't Su Mo like him? Don't you want to play with him?" Wen Yuan looked at him in disbelief. "Didn't you forbid me to contact Kong Xiao? That was in the past. Now it's different." Yimu Bai stroked her long hair and thought. Kong Xiao is in his 30s. Didn't Wen Yuan say that teacher has been anxious about his marriage? Su Mo is not bad. You just said that she's a trap. Wen Yuan looked at him. He smiled. Did I? Did I say that?" "That's right." Wen Yuan thought about it carefully. "I'll try." Yimu Bai looked at her and sighed in his heart. Actually, Wen Yuan was really simple. She was a single-celled creature. All her schemes were probably used to chase after him. Wen Yuan had already started to plan in her heart. She was absent-minded. Yimu Bai was secretly amused. Wen Yuan was really a treasure girl. It was probably because she hadn't gone out to work in the past few years. Early the next morning, Yimu Bai asked the chauffeur to send the two kids to school. He brought Wen Yuan to buy some fruits and flowers. They wanted to buy lilies, but Wen Yuan said that the teacher had rhinitis, so carnations were fine. He let her choose, and, after paying, he took her to the hospital. Kong Xiao followed his mother's surname. Although teacher Kong was staying in the hospital, he was resting and did not have any major problems. However, it was inconvenient for him to stay alone, so he decided to stay for more than 10 days. Teacher Kong kept saying that Kong Xiao was using up public resources. Kong Xiao poured water for her mother as she sat down. This place is usually empty, so it's not occupied. Not many people stayed in the ward that cost 10,000 yuan a night. Besides, his mother didn't want to stay with him, and she didn't want to hire a nurse to take care of her. He could only come to see her every day. Fortunately, he would be fine after a few days. Teacher Kong sighed. "I've always felt uneasy. I've been teaching all my life, and I've always been clean. Now it's too wasteful." Kong Xiao smiled faintly. "Mom, you're thinking too much. Let's see if any of the students you teach are clean." Mother Kang's face turned stern. She's also someone who loves fame and fortune. I've said it before. It's good to be a professor in a music academy, but she insisted on going abroad. As she said that, she sighed. Actually, Wen Yuan is very good. Kong Xiao said bitterly. "Mom, why are you mentioning this?" Back then, if he hadn't gone abroad, it would have been impossible for him and Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan's family was very prominent, and she had no feelings for him. Chapter 39:60. While Kong Xiao and Mrs. Kong were talking, Yimu Bai and Wen Yuan were standing at the door with a nurse. When Kong Xiao saw them, he was stunned. Then the atmosphere became awkward. Yimu Bai was the first to speak. "Wen Yuan, please have a chat. Kong Xiao and I will go outside for a smoke." Although he said that, he still helped Wen Yuan carry the gifts in and greeted Ms. Kong politely. It was Ms. Kang's first time seeing Yimu Bai. She had seen him in movies before. He was more mature and introverted in real life. Ms. Kong sighed in her heart. What kind of family did he come from? Kong Xiao really couldn't compare. Yimu Bai comforted the old man and went out with Kong Xiao. Wen Yuan helped Mrs. Kong to sit down. Ms. Kong, how are you feeling? Mrs. Kong smiled and put her hand on the back of her hand. I'm fine. It's just an old problem. Kong Xiao was worried and wanted me to stay in the hospital. It's boring here. Wen Yuan remembered what Kong Xiao had said to her before and tried to persuade her. Ms. Kong, Kong Xiao is flying all over the world. You should hire an Annie to take care of him. That way, he will feel more at ease. Ms. Kong was silent for a while and said in a low voice, Actually, I'm afraid that with an Annie, Kong Xiao will come back less often. She paused. It's not appropriate to say this, but Wen Yuan knows that Kong Xiao has something on his mind. He doesn't really want to come back. He might not want to face it. Ms. Kong sighed. He has made a lot of money these years. They call him a music genius. What genius? His music has lost its soul. It's just techniques. It's very exaggerated. Wen Yuan couldn't say anything. Actually, she had noticed it last time. Ms. Kong changed the topic. Let's not talk about this. Wen Yuan, I heard that you're doing well recently. I'm very happy for you. Wen Yuan pursed his lips. He's all right. Ms. Kong smiled. He's very handsome. As he moved by his pride dog, Wen Yuan smiled a little foolishly. At this moment, another wave of students came to visit Teacher Kong. They were all doing quite well. Some were running private training classes, some were going abroad, and some were slightly famous in the music industry. The worst one seemed to be Wen Yuan. She had achieved nothing and stayed at home. Moreover, she had divorced a famous person. Very few students knew that she had married Yimu Bai, the CEO of Stars Entertainment. Wen Yuan was besieged. It was a 10-year class reunion. Wen Yuan instinctively wanted to refuse because she didn't know if Yimu Bai wanted her to participate, so she said she might not be free. A female classmate looked at Wen Yuan and cleared her throat. Wen Yuan's bag isn't bad. It's a Hermes Platinum bag, right? But I heard that there are some imitations these days that are really good. What's the source? Can you tell us? Of course, we won't carry fake ones. But it's inevitable that our relatives will like it. It's good to give one to them to satisfy their vanity. Wen Yuan looked at Teacher Kong. Teacher Kong was also very helpless. Just as she was about to say something, Wen Yuan told her not to say it. She didn't care about this. The female classmate continued to speak harshly. By the way, we're all bringing family members to this gathering. Wen Yuan, has he remarried in the past few years? It's understandable that he found a wife so well the first time around. If he hasn't, he can still be single. I'm married, Wen Yuan said calmly and smiled. Chapter 39:61. The female classmate was surprised. You married? We've never heard of it. By the way, where are you working now? The man you found isn't good enough, right? You've put aside your professional knowledge for so many years. It must be hard and poor for you to do something else. Wen Yuan smiled. It's all right. She had been indifferent the whole time, and the women who took turns to talk were pretty boring. Thus, she put on a fake smile and put on a plump face. I'll definitely participate when the time comes. If life is too difficult, there's still us classmates. We can all take care of each other. Wen Yuan still smiled faintly and watched those girls leave. After they left, Teacher Kong sighed. They're still thinking about the time when you were in the limelight in school. The children who used to be so simple and straightforward had now become like this. It was really heartbreaking. Teacher Kong looked at Wen Yuan. Don't go if you don't want to. Don't force yourself. Wen Yuan smiled. Teacher, I'm fine. I'm fine. If I go, I'll go. Otherwise, I'll seem too petty. Teacher Kong was annoyed and amused at the same time. He also felt sorry for her. You're too easy to talk to. You've been bullied to this extent. Why don't you defend yourself? Because it's not someone I care about. Wen Yuan smiled faintly and supported Mrs. Kong. Let me give you a massage. Your waist will hurt again if you keep sitting. Mrs. Kong didn't refuse. She truly loved Wen Yuan as her own daughter. So, She wouldn't refuse when Yuan's kindness. Besides, only when Yuan looked at her sincerely. The two of them chatted. Kong Xiao and Yi Mubai were smoking in the corridor. Kong Xiao's gaze was especially deep. After a long time, he whispered, "Yi Mubai, you win." He paused for a moment and then said, "Actually, I can never be with her. From the day I went abroad, or the day I was born, I was destined to never be with Wen Yuan. Yi Mubai is a truly beautiful person. She hasn't seen any darkness. Treat her well." Yi Mubai smiled faintly. "Kong Xiao, do you know what you're like?" Kong Xiao stared at him. Yi Mubai's voice was low. "It's like having the appearance of an angel and the heart of a devil." Kong Xiao was stunned. "You're really thorough. Then why did you give Su Mo a chance to get close to me? Don't say it was a coincidence. I didn't choose the place that day. It was an impromptu decision. Because Su Mo is the opposite of you. She has the toughest appearance and the softest heart. Kong Xiao, let her save you. Otherwise, you won't be clean for the rest of your life." Yi Mubai said. Concho, on the other hand, was still standing on the armrest, quietly smoking. Kong Xiao. He smiled. He laughed. He, she, he, who, he, and he, him, he, she, he, Kong, he, the, he. He put out his cigarette and was about to turn around and leave when he saw a thin figure wearing a mask. If he was not mistaken, that person was Su Mo. Kong Xiao pursed his lips. When he came back to himself, he had already gone downstairs. He grabbed her hand before she left. "Why did you come to the hospital?" He had a bad idea. He hooked the medical file bag in her hand and opened it. Then his face turned pale. She was checked for HIV in the hospital. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.